Good morning, students in RSC 310, Religious Traditions of China. This is Dr. Brewster, and I'm recording this brief mini lecture on Wednesday, September 1st, but this will be converted into a YouTube video that you can take in by the end of the day on Friday, September 3rd. And this is in lieu of an in-person class session on Friday this week. There's also a discussion forum posting that accompanies this YouTube video. And let me share with you the prompt for the discussion forum this week. The question for the discussion forum essentially elicits reflection and open-ended commentary or thoughts you have on any aspect of the three teachings, namely Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, any aspect of these traditions that configure the Chinese religious and philosophical landscape from ancient times that seems most meaningful to you. So any aspect of what we've talked about in the past week in our introduction to Chinese religious and philosophical traditions is open for you to comment on, and I look forward to hearing your reading your reflections, that is. So today, this brief mini lecture focuses on giving you an overview of the three teachings and some of their similarities and differences and their current significance in modern China. So Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, they constitute the three pillars of the tripod of traditional Chinese religiosity. They have largely defined Chinese religious culture as well as philosophical thinking throughout dynastic China from ancient times. So the PRC, the People's Republic of China, that was founded in 1949, that currently the PRC state currently recognizes five religious traditions as officially recognized by the state. Those are Buddhism, Catholicism, Taoism, Islam, and Protestantism. So the practice of any other faith apart from these five is formally prohibited, but it's often tolerated. In the case of traditional Chinese beliefs, such as those including ancestor worship, the worship of ancestors, or worship of local gods, these local and traditional practices cohering on ancestor worship and local shrines don't fit neatly into these five categories. So this course, as I mentioned, is organized around the three teachings that are deeply formative and influential in Chinese civilization and a broader East Asian civilization that's influenced by the Sinitic cultural sphere. Sinitic means related to China. It's a word for the native or indigenous culture of China that deeply influences the broader East Asian region. The word sinologist is also related to the word Sinitic, Sino meaning related to China. This word sinologist means someone who's a China hands or someone who's an expert in Chinese studies. So these three traditions, Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, the three teachings, Sanjiao in Chinese, they are known as isms, but internally they do evince or exhibit a considerable degree of diversity, just contained within these broader categories. So each of these traditions, Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, contain considerable internal diversity, but for the sake of organizational clarity, we consider in this context of this course, these three traditions to constitute the main line of Chinese religion and philosophy in traditional China. So as philosophies and as religions, these three traditions not only have influenced spirituality, but also government, science, the arts, and social structure. And through their specific beliefs and teachings, or their specific beliefs and teachings have sometimes been at odds with each other, but there has been much room for cross-hybridization and for mutual influence between these three traditions. So instead of one tradition taking over and subordinating or excluding the other two traditions, the three teachings have simultaneously influenced one another and stood alongside one another, and at times blended together. So understanding the unique interplay between these three teachings will give us great insight into pre-modern Chinese society, as well as into modern times. So Chinese indigenous religions of Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, they don't require exclusive membership like the Abrahamic faiths of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, or the other monotheisms. So for example, there's no Pope of Taoism or any centralized ecclesiastical structure. And the doctrines or the teachings of these three traditions are not necessarily mutually exclusive. So you could be a Confucian in your public life as a political official, subscribe to Confucianism, then you could be a devout Buddhist in your private life. And there's many examples throughout dynastic China of elites who profess Confucianism in publicly, but also are deeply profess deep Buddhist devotion. So this is because these teachings are not necessarily mutually exclusive. In contrast to the three major Abrahamic faiths, those faiths that derive from the patriarch Abraham, namely Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So even though Islam and Christianity are world religions with global reach and extent, in China, they are relatively minor. And they claim in their combined number of adherents, only about 10% of the population. And most Han Chinese, that is the majority ethnicity in China, believe in an amalgam of Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, and other traditional values and ideas that still resonate deeply to the present day. So the first of the three teachings is Confucianism. And Confucianism is important for us to study in the present day, not just as a historical interest, but also with impact in current geopolitical affairs, is because the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, increasingly seeks to bolster Confucianism by promoting Confucianism as a holistic and this worldly philosophy that emphasizes human relationships of filiality and provides a source of social morality, and it also provides a basis for political philosophy. So filiality is a word that is related to a filial piety, or filiality means reverence for your parents in particular. And respect, the primary duty of respect, obedience, and care, primarily directed to one's parents and elderly family members. So filial piety is foremost importance and centrality in Confucian traditions. And now president for life, President cum autocrat Xi Jinping, has developed and promoted cultural revivalism through the promotion of Confucian values of filial piety, that is reverence for parental authority and elderly family members in particular. And this filial piety extends to authority figures, whether that be one's ruler, one's father, one's elders, or one's husband. So predominantly male authority figures are valorized, are emphasized and revered in Confucian teachings. So we can see traditional Confucian teachings are rather androcentric, meaning male-centered, and patriarchal in terms of emphasizing the filial piety and reverence for authority figures, which invariably tend to be male figures, in particular the patriarch of the family. So Xi Jinping, president for life now, he rules over China like a benevolent patriarch would rule over his family. The Confucianism as a metaphor for ruling the state as a father would care for his family. So Confucianism as a tradition contains both religious seeming elements such as liturgies, and you can see the Confucius temple here, Kongmiao, in Beijing in China, the capital of China. You have liturgy, and you have people participating in with vestments in this liturgy. So there's aspects of Confucianism that seem religious, but it also includes a formal set of, or it includes also a moral philosophical aspect as well. So the distinction or the boundary between religion and philosophy is rather hazy and amorphous in the Chinese and the broader East Asian context, because the word religion and the word philosophy, they only enter the Chinese lexicon, or the vocabulary of the Chinese language in the 19th century, from the Japanese coined these terms to refer to the Western concepts of religion and philosophy. So scholars debate whether or not the extent to which religion as a label can be applied to Confucianism, or whether or not it's purely a moral philosophy or a political philosophy. So Confucianism, earlier generations of scholars tended to define religion in terms of Western and essentially monotheistic terms. So namely, whether or not it contains a particular tradition contains a codified set of religious tenets or scripture, such as a Bible. But the Confucianism doesn't have this aspect of a feature of a one single Bible as a standard scripture for the whole tradition. So another complication complicating the classification of Confucianism as either religion or philosophy or both is the fact that the distinction between religion and philosophy is rather hazy in the traditional Chinese context. And as I mentioned, the terms religion and philosophy as renderings of the Western terms only enter into Chinese language in the 19th century. So religious and philosophical elements are commingling together in Confucianism. So as I mentioned, Confucianism valorizes and highly emphasizes the value and filial piety of reverence for one's parents in particular and elderly family members. But this extends to 5 types of relationships in Confucianism. Those between ruler and subject. So that's one form of filial piety, the reverence that a subject has for the ruler and minister for the ruler. A father and son, elder and younger brothers, husband and wife, and friends. So husband and wife, we can see this valorizes the husband and puts the husband on the higher pedestal, because the wife is supposed to be have filial piety and be obedient to the husband in traditional Chinese Confucian teachings. And these are regarded as the way that things really should be. They're naturalized as the natural way of things. So as we can see, this teaching, as originally formulated, is highly androcentric, or from a male point of view. But a more gender-neutral interpretation of the third a more gender-neutral interpretation, rather, that applies to both genders and non-gender conforming individuals, when the third relationship is between not only elder and younger brothers, but between elder and younger siblings in general. So we're going to discuss in detail this Confucian teaching of Wu Luan, or the 5 relationships of filiality, when we get to Du Weiming's book next week, The Centrality and Commonality. So the second of the 3 teachings is Taoism. And Taoism, like Confucianism, contains both religious and philosophical strands, or streams. And these are sometimes considered to be separate strands, religious Taoism and philosophical Taoism, on the other hand. So Taoist ideas and teachings are deeply formative to the East Asian martial arts. So in particular, the example of judo is very relevant, because judo is the Japanese pronunciation of the Chinese word ro dao, meaning the way of softness or pliability. So in judo, you harness your opponent's strength to destabilize them and knock them over, but not by brute force, but by harnessing their opponent's power against them. So this characteristic, paradigmatic teaching of ancient Taoism, the strength of weakness, is developed by the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu that we read, I believe, in week 8. And we're going to read his passages from his Dao De Jing, his classic of the way and the power. So Taoism, in summary, has both religious and philosophical aspects, which are considered to be separate strands by some scholars, and deeply influential in East Asian martial arts, and draws later forms of Taoism draw deeply from Buddhism and from Confucianism, and there's considerable cross-hybridization between these three teachings throughout traditional dynastic Chinese history. So the third teaching that makes up the tripod of Chinese religious culture, the three legs of the tripod, is Buddhism, the way of the Buddha, 佛教 in Chinese, the teaching of Buddha. So Buddhism, since the first century of the Common Era, has deeply influenced about almost every aspect of Chinese life, social mores, values, morality, modes of worship. Even the language itself has drawn many terms and words from Chinese translations of Buddhist works from India or from Inner Asia. Chinese Buddhism has also influenced the culinary culture of China, and it was originated the tea culture that is so important and valued across East Asia and also very popular in the West. So tea culture was first promoted and developed by Buddhists in China. So Chinese forms of Buddhism, or Sinitic forms of Buddhism, that we're going to study in the third section of this course, is a major religious tradition, and it claims hundreds of millions of followers in China, as well as across the globe, increasingly in the West. So Buddhism, while originating in India in the 6th century before the Common Era, it has been domesticated, so to speak, or made Chinese. The word that scholars of Sinology or Chinese studies use to describe how Buddhism was domesticated and made into uniquely Chinese tradition is called sinification, meaning to be made Chinese, and the verb is sinicized. So Indian or Indic Buddhism underwent massive transformations to fit the Sinitic cultural environment. And there's deep commonalities and similarities, continuities between Indian or Indic and Sinitic Buddhism, but also vast differences in terms of doctrine and practice. And the question of how Buddhism was altered, modified, and transformed to fit the Sinitic, the Chinese cultural environment, this is one of the most leading and most important guiding questions for researchers into Chinese Buddhism. And Chinese Buddhism is a major field in Buddhist studies. And before I came to Iona, I was a postdoctoral fellow at University of British Columbia and a postdoc that was devoted to Chinese Buddhism. So there's chairs in Chinese Buddhism at major research universities and colleges across the North America and across the world. So Buddhism is increasingly important and increasingly resurging in China in recent decades, since the 改革开放 in Chinese, or the economic liberalization of economic and religious liberalization that was implemented starting in 1979 by Deng Xiaoping. The chairman Deng Xiaoping, who succeeded from Mao Zedong. And Buddhism has become increasingly popular and widespread among all levels of Chinese society, both elite and non-elite, both the hoi polloi, or the common ordinary folk, and political and economic elites. And in recent years, Chinese elites have increasingly patronized Buddhist temples and monasteries, which have become, in some cases, very wealthy. So this slide contains a photo of great Amitabha Buddha, monastery in Wuxi in Zhejiang province in Zhejiang or region of China, province of China, the Yangtze River Delta in south eastern China. And there's a huge statue of Amitabha Buddha. I believe it's more than 100 meters tall. And this is an important Buddha in Mahayana Buddhism, the form of Buddhism that is widespread in East Asia and in China. So this is one of the most wealthy provinces in China. And you can see that this monastery is quite opulent. Many monasteries have a lot of money in China and also have even have attained the status of publicly traded companies. The Shaolin Monastery, which is the birthplace of Shaolin Kung Fu, actually went IPO. It did an initial public offering on the as a publicly traded company on the Chinese Stock Exchange. So a lot of monasteries are increasingly patronized by lay donors, and many of whom are elites. So recent years have witnessed some crackdowns, however. Despite a resurgence, there's been some crackdowns and restrictions on the practice of Buddhism in China. And recently, in Yangtze River Delta region, the same region where this temple is located, Amitabha Buddha Monastery, there has been a destruction of massive Buddhist statues that are unauthorized. So many Buddhist sites have come in recent years under some scrutiny and even have been destroyed by the state. So in conclusion, after the persecution of all the religions during the days of Maoism and during the Cultural Revolution, after this economic liberalization and this period of persecution that comes after the period of persecution during the Cultural Revolution, since this time, the Chinese state is increasingly turning and embracing the ideas that have made up the political and religious order that ran China for much of the past 2,500 years. So China is not only the resurgence of these traditions of Buddhism or Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism that have defined the political and religious order for the past 2,500 years. These traditions not only address China's moral vacuum, with many people becoming disillusioned by rampant consumerism and materialism, but also as a populist measure. So the country is entering a more uncertain era of slower growth and increasing social surveillance and authoritarianism and a rising inequality. And Beijing, the capital, is draping itself in the mantle or the cloak, the robes of tradition, to broaden its appeal as a kind of populist strategy. So in conclusion, despite some of the recent persecutions and crackdowns on religious and particularly Buddhist sites in China, the country is increasingly witnessing the resurgence of Buddhism at all levels of society, with many even Chinese Communist Party members being Buddhist donors and Buddhist lay practitioners. So the country is entering a period of greater authoritarianism and social surveillance, and deep inequality. So the regime is the Chinese Communist Party is draping itself in the cloak of the tradition and using these traditional teachings and belief systems to appeal to the populace. All right, so thank you for your attention, and I look forward to reading your discussion forum postings due by the end of the day on Friday. Thank you and take care. Have a good weekend.